Hey there. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome back. It's another Red Pill Religion podcast. Red Pill Religion, where amongst the many things we say is that marriage under current secular law, all, all over the world, but certainly in the United States, under secular law has become an obviously illegal and unjust contract. Those of you who are living under it may feel secure, but it's way less secure than you think it is. And we must do things to reform it legally, socially, and otherwise. If you like the kind of work we do here on Red Pill Religion, please check us out. Remember to check us out on redpillreligion.com. Every day we are updated here. In these days of social media censorship, we've been chased away from multiple platforms just talking about things like this. So remember, if you lose our channel here on YouTube, you can always find us on redpillreligion.com. And we are still investigating other platforms. It's all just a matter of me finding time to get things done. So on YouTube, while we're still here, please give us a like, please give us a subscribe, please hit that notification bell, and tell your friends or enemies all about us. We're here every night, and no one can shut us up. But in any case, if you visit us on redpillreligion.com, we appreciate it if you drop a dime in the PayPal or the Bitcoin, or support us on Patreon or Subscribestar or one of our other funding platforms. I'll also remind you, you can find us under most social media under the name Red Pill Religion. We do increasingly have a preference for upstart different sources like dissenter.com, gab.com, MeWe.com, Minds.com, but you will find us on places like Twitter and Facebook too. So go ahead and look us up, and we could use your help and your support. Now tonight, I am pleased to say that our guest is Bay Macfarlane. I'm saying the name Bay right? Right. It's an interesting spelling of the name Bay, but Bay Macfarlane of Mary's Advocates. Now, Mary's Advocates is, I guess we could call it an advocacy and support group for people who are dealing with an unwanted divorce. And it's an important topic. If you go now, Bay, you've been doing this work for decades, right? Talking about the problems of no-fault divorce
since 2004.
Okay.
And I've been doing it full time for almost 4 years with donations.
That is awesome. Everybody who's interested in this, if you're being subjected to an unwanted divorce or you know somebody who is, do check out marysadvocates.org. Certainly they could use your donations, and they also have resources and information for you. To get into my own background on this, of course, I'm not going to talk about my personal background, but anybody who knows, I was in a movie called The Red Pill by a young ex-feminist named Cassie J. It's a very good movie. It talks somewhat about these issues because I don't endorse everybody who's in that film, but certainly very good people are in there, like Warren Farrell, like Tim Goldich, like Janice Fiamengo. And it's all very interesting, and it somewhat touches on this only because these days, statistically, a man is more likely to be subjected to an unwanted divorce than a woman is based on the statistics I've seen. Nevertheless, what some men don't know, especially in men's rights circles, and certainly in a lot of MGTOW circles, is that it does go the other way sometimes. And historically, it was probably quite a bit more likely to affect a woman than a man. And there are certainly plenty of women I've contacted who've been victims of this. So let's talk about it, because the history of this, and I'm going to ask Bay to give us her expertise. It really does seem to me like the way marriage is structured now, like Barbarossa and other MGTOW have said, it's an illegal contract the way it's set up now, because either party these days, okay, maybe statistically more likely the woman, but it can pull this, but the man can too, especially if he's smart, ruthless, sociopathic, and wealthy. That basically you can unilaterally sever an agreement, take the kids, take the house, take everything, and sock the other person with huge payments that they can barely make, and keep their kids away from them and have taken their homes away from them. This is a thing that happens mostly, I would think, as a result of no-fault divorce. What's your opinion on that, babe?
100%, I agree with you. For those who want to renege on their marriage promises, no-fault divorce is the way to cash in on the government's reward for reneging on your marriage promises. But the problem is that reward doesn't really come from the government. The reward comes from the other spouse, who Like you said, most divorces are women filing against husbands, and then the husbands have to pay the women so the women can continue reneging on their marriage promises. Now, in order for this to make any sense, we kind of need to step back or up and look at what really is marriage. I think the culture right now is very confused. They're kind of making it up as they go along. But I come at this from a Judeo-Christian perspective, that we are created by God, and there is some things in our nature that were just put there by Him, and marriage is one of them. And marriage is a cell upon which a society is built. It's also the safe, secure way for children to be raised with both a mom and a dad, feminine and masculine. It's also the safe, secure way for an adult to have children, where they are ensured that they will have an ongoing natural power that's right to be involved in the upbringing of those children. One thing I heard from Stephen Baskerville, author of Taken into Custody, is that for a man, marriage is really the way that he's ensuring that the children are his children and he has a right to them. Because if there was no such thing as marriage, all these women would be having children from different guys, and the guys have no say in what happens to their own kids. And anyone who's a half normal man, deep in his instinct and his heart, is to love and take care of his kids.
Yeah, this is something that a lot of the young men I encounter, especially those who've gone the, what's called the MGTOW path, men going their own way, won't have anything to do with women. And that's fine as a personal choice, really. Nobody's required to get married or get with a woman or anything like that. You're not required to. You're really not. There's no shame here. But, and a lot of you guys out there that are listening, the audience is mostly male. A lot of you young guys out there, I think, have been listening to too much pseudoscience from guys like Sandman and Stardust and a few of those others that are really slinging a lot of pseudoscience and acting like men don't have a natural biological urge for mate and children. But everybody knows this isn't true. There's also a lot of fake science floating around the manosphere these days, claiming that women were two or three times more likely to reproduce than men were historically. That is based on some really dodgy and questionable science. If you look at the actual math, most men want to mate, most women want to mate. And if you want to look at it purely from an anthropological, non-Judeo-Christian perspective, we actually can go through most societies and see that even in primitive hunter-gatherer societies, if they don't choose lifelong monogamy, what they still tend to do is pair bond up for until the kids get a certain age, and then they go find another mate, if they do it that way. So it's something like, and people are known in the most primitive non-religious cultures to murder somebody or kill or get violent or whatever if they find them cheating on them. Those of you who don't believe in the supernatural should still realize this is a natural function in humans. We really want to have a wife and children. Most men really do. I would say that one of the things, and I'm just going to ramble a bit here, but it matters. One of the things that happens is that a lot of young men, especially young men raised without a dad, really are quick to just believe that somehow the whole mating game, the whole marriage game is a trick by society. I've literally heard so many talk this way, that it's a trick by society to get a man to enslave himself to a woman by social expectation, and now we can all see that's a fraud, and marriage isn't a real thing. Well, horse hockey. Okay, most guys, when you really ask them, most of them, including some of the most hardcore MGTOW I've talked to, have said, what I would really like is a girl who really likes me and who likes me and who I could have a family with, and that's really kind of what I want. And they'll get mocked and shamed for that mentality. But in fact, that's a normal attitude for men to have. Another thing that will happen with a lot of men is they'll be young, and especially if they grow up in a broken home, like I did, they think they don't want kids and they have no interest in that. But guys talk all the time about certain women getting baby rabies, and all of a sudden they're hitting the age of 30 or so and they want a baby in the worst way, which does happen. They don't know that men get baby rabies too, and they get it in a big way. I'll talk to some 25-year-old punk, and I'm sorry, I'm 53, so if you're 25, I can call you a punk, who thinks he knows everything and thinks he has no interest in kids. And then one day, all of a sudden, something will happen Maybe it'll be something on TV, online. Maybe it'll be a friend. Maybe it'll be a niece or a nephew or a cousin who's a child who suddenly catches your eye. And just like happened to me and a lot of guys I know, it was all of a sudden I thought I didn't want kids, and then I met this kid and I wanted one just like her or just like him, because it's natural. And you know what else is natural in males? We say females have a nurturing instinct, which they do. Mothers do. It's part of being a woman. What we miss is the fact that men have a very strong nurturing impulse too. We are rewarded by taking care of a woman and child. You can look at that paternalistically, even condescendingly, but I can tell you this is natural in men. They want wife and kids, and they actually want to take care of them. This is normal in men. It is not religious brainwashing. And so anybody who's out there saying it's all hopeless, well, no. Guys who want a stable woman, a stable mate, a stable relationship, we should have a society that makes it possible for them. We should also admit that sometimes men take advantage of the system and go sociopathic. If they're clever enough and they're ruthless enough, they can destroy their ex-wife, no problem. Most guys don't do that, but it can happen. So I think the most important conversation is, how do we make it safe for people to have and construct families again? And even when you look at it from a religious perspective, it becomes even more sharply in focus. But I want the secular, non-religious part of this audience to hear it. The so-called Judeo-Christian idea of marriage didn't purely come out of the Bible, okay? This is normal in humans. Humans want this. Humans want mates and stable relationships with the opposite sex to create families. And human males and females love their children. I know this almost sounds Martian to people like they or my age, but really, I meet young men all the time who just think marriage is a joke, family's a joke, it's a trick, fathers, and it's all wrong. We do need to do something to reform the legal system so that it is safe for men to take this option again, and for women. And we got to have some kind of ceasefire between the sexes on these things. In any case, Bay, the history of this is interesting because there was no such thing as no fault divorce when I was growing up, and I'm only 53, so I'm not that old. When did no fault start becoming popular? Was it California in the 70s?
It started in California in it's either 69 or 79. 69. Wow, I'm drawing a blank. There was a uniform divorce commission of lawyers and judges from all over the country that met every 6 months or so, and they were developing this Uniform Marriage and Divorce Act that then they promulgated to all the state legislators, and then the legislatures, one by one, enacted unilateral no-fault divorce. It was sold to the public as a way for a couple who mutually both wanted to terminate their marriage and go their separate ways to do so without having to lie to the court, because in fault-based divorce, one would have to accuse the other of adultery or extreme cruelty, danger, stuff like that, real, actual, provable abuse. So the way it was sold to the public is that now we have this nice, friendly way, if mom and dad both want to split up, to allow them to do so without lying to the court. Well, what it immediately became is unilateral, forced, no-fault divorce, where the defendant and children have no say in the matter. So how the judiciary responds, and now I would go so far as even to say how the public responds when there's a marriage crisis, is very disheartening, and it's destructive to everything. Because when one party wants to keep the marriage together, wants to have everyday access to their children, and the other party wants to force a no-fault divorce, the power of the state takes aside as what I would call the marital abandoner, the person who's reneging on their marriage promises. So that's what happened, and that's what's happening now. So I understand why someone with their eyes open would never want to enter marriage, because what they think they're entering is what you call this, what do you call it, an illegitimate contract or an illegal?
Illegal, almost enslaving, potentially enslaving contract. Yeah.
Right. It's a really stupid contract. Nobody who knows what it is would want to do it, because what it's saying is, well, I'll start having kids with you and share some property with you, knowing that at any time in the future you could decide you want to leave and you could take the property and the children with you. How's that sound? I mean, that's just stupid. I think
and in fact, while you said that you get all this money if you divorce from support payments and such, which you will, you are hitting your children's other parent that way. But the state and government often gives matching dollars for child support enforcement, and things like friend of the court in a lot of states run on a profit because they skim those support payments for themselves, and they often get federal matching dollars for especially they get special funding. At least they
Title IX.
Yeah, I think it's under Title IX, but basically
the federal government will reimburse the counties or local court systems so they can employ personnel who can follow up on all, decades ago they were called deadbeat dads. When I was maybe 20 years ago, they used to have them on milk jugs and newspapers and stuff. It was, and I, as a naive person, just thought, oh, that must be a bad person. And then when I started to learn what no fault was, my eyes were open. A lot of those so-called deadbeat dads were nothing but reliable, half-decent husbands whose wives abandoned them and use this government to go after them. It's very bad.
Oh, it is. And the phony, we don't even have to get into the phony allegations of abuse thing. Just to tell you, I can tell you, even in like where I live, members of Friends of the Court will often strong arm a woman into making allegations of abuse. I mean, they'll like coach her and say, did he ever make you feel uncomfortable? Did he ever raise his hand towards you? Did he ever pound the door? Do you feel you are in danger? Because if you feel you're in danger at all, you can just sign this piece of paper and we'll take care of him.
I know. I've written articles about the legislation in some states where it says that if I feel afraid, the mere feeling of afraid about something you're going to do in the future is a reason for you to lose everyday access to your children and be kicked out of your home. Now, where in the criminal court, well, I guess it's happening maybe even now, but I mean, it's very unjust. It's like one of the things of science fiction movies where we're going to start anticipating who's going to commit a crime down the road and we'll kill them in advance or put them in jail. So,
and they get money for these sorts of things too.
I mean, in order to not get depressed, I don't focus on the negative entirely, though there's a lot of negative that's real. But as a culture or anybody, you can only work towards solving and addressing an injustice when you understand what it is. So what you and I are talking about right now is laying out what it is. It's why people are hesitant to enter marriage.
But here's the other thing that's happening. I can tell you a couple of things that are happening, and then we're going to go into some of the specific resources and cases that you know about. I can tell you that one of the things that's happening is there are fights happening in more and more states over this issue. It matters. And there's even a lawsuit being filed that we're going to talk to Bay about in a minute. I will also tell you another thing that is happening, and this runs contrary to all you guys who think that marriage is just an invention of the government or the state. There's a growing number, and I don't know if Bay's gotten into this, but I've heard this from R.K. Hendrick and others. There's a growing number of people who are getting married in church and refusing the state license. And that's not always necessarily the best choice either, but it's gotten to that point. And it boomerangs two ways. One, this option is available for some Christians. I don't think it is for Catholics. I don't think Catholics will approve that right now, but they might eventually. And another is, actually, I forgot what the other one is. But one thing what this should tell you is marriage is going to keep happening no matter what. Marriage in some form is going to keep happening. People will do this. I'm telling you, even if you don't believe the religious stuff, this is natural, evolved human behavior to want to be with a mate that you stay with and raise children with. It's totally natural and normal. So what are some of the, let's start with this. What are some of the solutions that you've come up with, Mary? Bay, sorry.
Yeah, Bay with Mary's Advocates. You want to talk about the solutions or you want to talk about the Nebraska husband?
Why don't we start with the Nebraska husband
Yeah,
then? For starters, by the way, we'll have more things to show you though, because we got resources and things you can do. So, okay, let's talk about this case. This is off the Mary's Advocate site. It says uncover truth in Nebraska, no fault divorce challenge. Tell me what this case is all about in Nebraska.
Okay, so this dad, they have no minor children. His wife withdrew from the marital home. I happen to learn by looking at the court records that the address that she says is her address is her parents' home. So I think she moved in where her parents are. So we can guess, maybe they're in their early 60s. We don't know. So the wife files a standard no-fault divorce complaint against the husband. And he had been doing his own research, and he found a lawyer willing to challenge no fault. So when the wife files, what they always ask for is, hey, I want equitable property division. I want the house. I want him to pay my lawyer's fees. And I want him to give me ongoing alimony support. So that's what the husband gets. His lawyer's first response was a motion to dismiss. And the reason they're asking for it to be dismissed was general principles about constitutional protections for due process. When I sue you in civil court, I have to accuse you of some behavior that is observable, measurable, judgeable, and you can defend whether or not you did this behavior, which is illegal. If we had a contract to do some kind of service and you totally botched the job to do the service, I bring you to civil court and I complain you didn't do the service and there's a behavior that's being judged. In no-fault divorce, there's nothing being judged at all. All that's happening is a plaintiff comes forward and depending on the state, she says, I feel our marriage is irretrievably broken, or there's been an irrevocable breakdown, or we're incompatible. Those are opinions. They're subjective. They're not based on the behavior of the husband. Does that make sense?
It does.
Okay. So that's one, because that's what's happening in no fault, the lawyer is challenging the constitutionality of the statutes of Nebraska themselves and saying, the defendants don't have a right. There's no basis. There's no way for them to defend themselves with a constitutional violation of due process. There's also this principle about private laws. You're not supposed to be making the court's not supposed to make up a law one person at a time. And every time the court has a no-fault divorce, they're literally making up a law for the plaintiff. They're taking the opinion of the plaintiff against the defendant. There's no behavior that's illegal being judged. And it's like a private law. So that's something that's also illegal. Now, because these parties both were married in a Catholic ceremony, they both presently profess to be Catholic. The lawyer is also challenging religious liberties, infringements on religious liberties. And this is the part that Mary's Advocates does focus a lot on Catholic principles about marriage, but I would argue that it's not unreasonable. Because when Catholics enter marriage, as they've been doing for, like 2,000 years, there is supposed to be a certain understanding of the parties' obligations towards each other. And those obligations include sexual fidelity. You're not supposed to be committing adultery when you go into marriage. You're promising sexual fidelity. I mean, you talked earlier about people shooting and killing each other or killing someone because adultery was such a horrible violation against the marriage promises. The other thing they promise is they promise that they're going to be they're going to be married for life. It's not something you quit just because you feel like it. Another thing they promise is that they're open to children. So that's the stuff of Catholic marriage.
Those are actually things you say when you get married in a Catholic ceremony these days. You're open to the children and all that, right?
Right. You're asked if you came here freely, the shotgun wedding, or you're mentally deranged and you're on drugs or something, or you're so drugged you can't think straight. That's a different situation. Another part of the Catholic doctrine is that when people marry, get this, they promise to live together and support one marital home. And then if one party does something so grievous to violate those marriage promises, those obligations they promise to uphold, then there could be a reason for separation of spouses. So if a husband truly was committing adultery routinely and had no intention of stopping, his wife would have a legitimate reason to be separated from him.
Right.
But most husbands in no-fault divorce, from what they're not committing adultery. The wife just is choosing to renege on her own marriage promises. So anyways, in this Nebraska case, the husband and wife agreed to be married in the Catholic system. The interesting thing about Nebraska law about marriage itself is that it uses the word contract in describing marriage. And it also says, and I'm going to paraphrase, and I have it quoted in the article there. Maybe you can find it faster than I can. But when parties marry in Nebraska, they can marry in accordance with the rules. If you search on the word rite, R-I-T-E, their church's customs and rites, the rite and customs of their religion. So the lawyer is saying to the court, I mean, he's not quoting that section of the law. I'm going on and on here, but he's bringing in the religious liberties problem, where the court, that the statutes themselves are violating religious liberties because the parties married in accordance with their religion, and the state can't just infringe upon those agreed upon obligations without satisfying certain criteria, which they're not. So anyways, first thing the lawyer did was he wrote this motion to dismiss. Weeks go by. The judge comes back and says, motion overruled. Then they had not yet submitted their answer to a complaint. When someone alleges a divorce, they make all these complaints like the marriage is irretrievably broken and the court should split up our property. And I have a right for the court to split up our property, and I want a husband kicked out of the house. Just a couple of days ago, April 3rd, the lawyer came back and he answered the wife's divorce complaint, item by item.
Wow.
He has one section where he lists all these constitutional principles that are being violated, and he goes into more detail than he did earlier with his motion to dismiss. The thing that he also did is he states that the husband doesn't know if the marriage was actually a valid contract in the first place. You know how you can have, if I signed a contract to buy your house when you had a shotgun to my head or I was sleepwalking,
right.
A valid contract. Well, or if I was mentally incompetent, like I was seriously mentally incapable of thinking straight, and that could be proven. There are such things as invalid or void contracts. And the Nebraska statutes have such a thing as an invalid or void marriage contract. So the husband is coming back and saying, or the lawyer, you know, my client is not even sure if this wife validly consented to marriage in the first place. We're going to assert that she was mentally incompetent.
Whoa, I kind of love it already, to be honest with you. Now, but before you go on, I'm going to mention something. A lot of people think, well, you know, people fighting on these issues have been failing for decades, so nothing's going to happen. But lawsuits like this, they're expensive. They're hard to do. You've got to find the right attorney who wants to do it. I can tell you that the National Coalition for Men, in specific, is the oldest group that does men's issues in generally, and that definitely, you know, the no-fault divorce thing is definitely a men's issue at this point. Although, again, we're not dismissing any women who have gotten messed over, because it happens. But they get most of their successes done not at the polls, but by filing lawsuits, by identifying suits in a clever way like this one to challenge things on constitutional and other legal grounds. So you really want to support people who are doing things like this. This is very clever because, I mean, obviously, he and the lawyer must be really committed to this, because this is a tough row.
Yeah. Well, the great thing about Nebraska is that divorce records are public. Like in Pennsylvania, they're not. But in Nebraska, they are. So I have shown on that article the complaints that the lawyer filed. You can scroll down and you can see the chronology. And I'm planning on continuing to cover this story, because the key piece about them alleging that the husband doesn't even know if the marriage is really valid, the wife is now in a position where she has to answer back. Was I mentally competent at the time of marriage, or was I not?
Oof.
And this, most, you know, a lot of people aren't going to understand the significance of this, but coming at it from a Catholic perspective, one of the things that I have found that is making it difficult to support marriage is that in the United States, the church system has been granting these annulment decrees where they're saying that husband and wife have no obligations towards each other as husband and wife because they were never married in the first place. And one of the grounds in the church system for an annulment is mental incompetence. So what happens to the people that I work with is a party will be a plaintiff in a no-fault divorce and to force the breakup of their marriage. They get the reward of no-fault divorce. Then they want to take the moral high ground. They go to the church and they say, oh, I have to do this process to go get an annulment. And then the church grants the annulment for psychological and mental incapacity. So what I'm trying to do is let's get this woman prior to the divorce trial, putting on the record whether she was mentally incompetent or not. She wants to take the moral high ground in her religious circles by saying that she should get an annulment and she never had any obligations towards her husband. Then let her say that fact in both forums. Does that make sense? I know I go on and on.
Okay, no, it makes a great deal of sense. Now, I mean, especially in the Catholic thing. Now, of course, if you're not Catholic, this doesn't apply. Although I want even those of you listening to this to take care, because if this lawsuit is successful, other people are going to be able to sue on similar grounds, and legal changes will occur. They will have to. And just fighting against an unwanted divorce, you may be sitting there saying, well, if she wants to go that bad, then, it's like, no, wait a minute. She doesn't get to run off with the kids. She doesn't get to run off with support treatment. She doesn't get to do any of that. If she wants to say she was never,
mentally competent. Mentally competent to enter marriage, then let her say it in the civil forum. What happens to spousal support when a woman was never a man's husband?
She can still get it, but now we're in a whole different kind of case. We're in a whole kind of different case. Because she probably can't get spousal support. She can get child support.
Okay. And then what happens to, say it was a fraudulent contract? Why, if a husband is earning a lot of money for his whole career, like this is what I'm saying this case is hinging on. The woman now is saying, I just want my no-fault divorce and I want you to split property and give me the house, or at least give me half the property, including everything. So here's this husband. In this case, they had a lot of kids. She was a stay-at-home mom. A lot of women don't get to do that. So this husband provided a comfortable standard of living. If the parties were never married because she says she was mentally incompetent, well, then she got room and board for 30 years, but she never was really married to the guy. How do you what's equitable there? We can argue about nothing being equitable. Let her go live with her dad if that's what she wants to do and let him take care of her, or let her become a ward of the state if she's so mentally incompetent. So I bring that up because we're pushing the envelope. Mary's Advocates is trying to publicize these kinds of cases. Because it's public record, I publicize the exact language the lawyer used. I hope other abandoned spouses will hear about this and try some of these exact same strategies.
I think it's useful, yeah, because it doesn't just have to be a Catholic thing either. Although it's going to be helpful with Catholics, because the Catholic Church is very, we got rules. We got canon lawyers even, we got, and what's so funny is you do identify this happens all the time. A woman will be in a religious group that doesn't generally recognize divorce. Catholics are the most obvious. What she'll do is she'll claim she was abused and all that, and she'll get divorced, and she'll get all kinds of support from people at church. Or, and I've heard about these cases, or all of a sudden she finds God during her divorce and now is in a church that is happy to take her money, and by extension her spouse's money.
Yeah, it's a nightmare.
It's a nightmare. And they go to some preacher who's happy to throw the husband under the bus because, she's a new parishioner and she's loud and she's vivacious and she brings money with her. And so they'll give her support that she shouldn't be getting. And again, I'm not going to say there's no bad guys out there who take advantage and do things like this, but just talking about a real typical case here, this is what it looks like. And it's actually shameful. More Christians in general should be throwing shade on women who announce that they've been abused and they're getting divorced. Real Christian men and women should be looking at this point at women who say that and say, are you telling the truth, sister?
Right. And you're talking about this being important for Catholics. There's a lot of information that Bob Sullivan, the lawyer, is using to defend marriage that has nothing to do with Catholicism. And that's also available.
Right. Right.
Right
It's just that it's clever here because they can use things that are in the Catholic law to suggest, that really to put this woman in a corner.
right.
Are you mentally capable?
Max, my goal is not to, make this woman look like an idiot. My goal is for marriages to stay strong and people stay together. And when the state rewards abandonment and the community remains silent, we have a bunch of hurting, broken people walking around. And
absolutely.
so I'm not an expert in helping parties reconcile. Since I've been involved in this work for the last 13 years, I find there are those who are very successful helping parties reconcile. It takes a little bit of humility, but it takes some willingness to grow. But if you're even a quarter normal person, as I like to say, half normal person. The goal for this couple, and even this husband, he doesn't really believe that his wife was mentally incompetent. He wants his wife to decide to work on reconciling and strengthening their marriage. But now he's got the state against him. So to get the state off his back, and maybe that would be a motive for the wife to reconsider. But when these women get awarded the house, kick their husband out, and take the kids away,
and all their girlfriends and people at church are going, "You go, girl! Oh, you whatever it is." Yeah. To stop. And I want to emphasize that this isn't about going after a particular person. It needs to be going after a social attitude. People have even forgotten something. I mean, I'll hear feminists, especially all the time, saying, "You want a woman to stay with a man who beats her, blah, 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 blah." Okay, stop. We have I don't even consider like chemical dependency or physical abuse necessarily justification for divorce. If that's what's going on, if you've got a spouse who's drugged out, stoned, drunk, gets violent, the solution is this ancient concept we used to have called a separation, which means you're going to go ahead and kick the other party out of the house, or you're going to go ahead and leave the house, but you're going to be citing your reasons and the conditions. In other words, you're still married. You might not see each other for a year, but you're still married. You might not see each other for 10 years. You're still married.
Max, the goal of a person who pursues a separation when the other is having these problems, the goal is not to beat up the other person. The goal is to try to get them help. There's a huge clue that I have when I hear about a marriage crisis. Is the other person willing to cooperate with those who are expert, helping you reconcile, helping you grow in character, helping you go in relationship skills? If they are not willing to cooperate with those kind of people, I know it's a marital abandonment. They just are quitting.
Because you should be willing to. You should absolutely be willing to try. And there should be moral opprobrium put on you if you don't. That's another thing. We have this whole social attitude that, oh, well, don't judge people, don't give them a hard time. No, really, divorcing is not cool. I mean, I think we could all agree that the 19-year-old couple who got married in Vegas and decided they made a dumb mistake is not really what we're talking about here. That's like the thin wedge. We're talking about something that when there's a divorce, it impacts the entire society. Every time there's a divorce, the children are hurt. There are no exceptions. And the damage is lifelong.
I know.
No exceptions. None. I don't care if you're sitting there saying, "It didn't affect me," you're lying to yourself.
Well, yeah, divorce is the gift that keeps on giving.
Yeah, it is. And
let's talk about some of the resources to try to steer people away from this whole unilateral no-fault thing proactively.
Let's absolutely do that, but let me finish my thought here, which is that really people, especially religious people, need to get harder about this with women and with men. Why are you getting divorced? Why are you doing this? This hurts the kids. This hurts the community. This actually creates financial instability, makes you more likely to wind up being a ward of the state or homeless. This affects your family. This affects our church. This affects our community. What are you doing and why are you doing this? And we need to be more brave about talking that way to people who are getting into a divorce. We really do. That said, if you're wanting to do something about this proactively, to get to Bay's point, because it's a really good point, what are the resources that you have to protect against this or to respond against it, Bay?
One of the things we developed is what I call a true marriage proclamation set. It's under our resources, but what it actually is, it's a covenant and arbitration agreement, and it's drafted to be signed by parties just prior to marriage, and it's designed to be recognized as a prenuptial agreement in the civil forum, or it could be signed after parties marry, and then it would be recognized as a postnuptial agreement in the civil forum. And the whole point of it is that parties lay out things that are kind of obligations about children and property and money that I've already talked about for what I'm calling normal marriage, but they designate a third-party arbitrator in the case of any kind of conflict. Because I come at it from a Judeo-Christian perspective, for people who marry in any Christian church, they designate the Christian Arbitration Association as the arbitrator to decide parties' obligations in case of a marriage crisis instead of the local no-fault divorce laws. So,
yeah, and let me tell you, I can already hear guys screaming that these prenups aren't enforceable and stuff like that. Yes, they are. Yes, they are. If they're written properly, it depends on where you are. I have it on good legal authority. Yes, if they're properly put together and done the right way, prenups work. They do. And they can be enforced, and it's worth looking into that. And this would be a form of religious prenup, basically, right?
Right. And if someone's from a Catholic tradition, instead of designating the third-party arbitrator as a Christian Arbitration Association, they designate the diocese that implements the Catholic doctrine and code of canon law about separation of spouses and divorce. And this tool, and we have a free version, so anyone can print the document I'm describing, but what you're showing on the website is the luxurious version, where we could provide this beautiful document that includes the traditional marriage vows. Say to your spouse, look, honey, when I say I want to be married for life, open to children, sexually faithful, and work together through our conflicts, I trust that we'll be okay long term. Or even if we have a problem, I want to manage it in a way that respects you. Then put it in writing. And if in writing, well, that's a reason to be suspicious in my book. So that's one strategy that we throw out there. I got to tell you, though, I've had it's been challenging to get people to adopt this idea. What do you think about it?
Oh, I think it's a fabulous idea. I think the resistance to it comes from people either believing it doesn't work, but I'm telling you, prenups can be enforced. If they are done properly, you just need to have the lawyer who knows how to do them. And people, there's this social stigma to it. The social stigma's got to end, because, and this is easier actually in a religious context. This is why this is clever. It's easier in a religious context than a secular context, because in a secular marriage, and you're not religious and whatever, you guys are just getting married. As soon as you say prenup, the other party goes, what? You don't trust me? You don't believe in me? You think I'm gonna, there's all this emotional turmoil that goes into it. But if you're actually religious, there's no reason at all you wouldn't want to sign something like this. You wouldn't want to agree to something like this if you're serious about your faith. And yeah, actually, you don't have to go with this luxurious, cool, swank-looking one that you've got.
Go down
for a religious person, this actually looks really awesome.
Yeah, Max, go down to the question and answers, because I show where people can see the language. It's the frequently asked questions. It's like the second one. Can I see a do-it-yourself version, and how much does it cost?
Do it yourself. I'm not saying. Oh, there it is. Can I see a free do-it-yourself, and how much does a luxurious cost?
So
the luxurious version is $50 plus $8 shipping. That ain't actually a lot. And if you're interested, here, you can download it yourself.
Right.
And just run it off a printer.
Right. Anyone can go get that, show it to a lawyer, show it to the minister, whatever. And, I wish we would recognize that when you get your state marriage license, you are entering a prenuptial agreement, aren't you? And the agreement you're entering is saying, whatever happens to us down the road, I agree that you can file whatever kind of no-fault divorce happens to exist in the state we reside at the time.
Okay.
Aren't you agreeing to that when you get your state marriage license, according to the state?
Yeah, pretty much. That's what you've agreed to.
Yeah, and if you don't actually agree to that, why not say so in writing? So
There
Yeah,
you go.
you're looking at the intro page, and you can scroll down and see more language on it. I hope.
Absolutely, we can see quite a bit. A covenant in
There you go.
anticipation of marriage. And see, if you fight, this is a document that's going to mean something. It's going to be especially useful too, because in any claim that, well, were you mentally capable of making this agreement? I think you were. Were you shocked? That's what the lawyers will tell you, by the way, is that as I recall, I think what R.K. Hendrick told me was 60 days. There's a certain time period in most states where basically, if you get something like this signed, I think it's 60 days. I'd have to check. If it's more than 60 days and less than 6 months or something like that, I don't remember the exact numbers, it becomes legally enforceable. Especially because like if you sign this thing 2 months before the marriage, and then you go ahead and get married, there's like zero way almost to say I was mentally forced or pressured into this.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's where the bottom pages talk about how either party has discussed it with a lawyer. So this is Mary's Advocate's attempt to preempt, while everyone's getting along nicely, unilateral no-fault divorce. But on the other end, we have some other resources for those who find themselves separated, where they're reluctantly separated, they're a divorce defendant, they don't want to divorce, they want to keep their family together, and they certainly don't want to have their children lose everyday access to dad, or if it's a woman defendant, mom. And we, under resources, we publicize constitutional principles, and I now know of a case in Minnesota, Nebraska, Pennsylvania, there was another one in Pennsylvania. We've got a relationship with the Religious Liberties constitutional lawyer in Chicago. He's had me on his radio show weekly. He has a weekly show in Chicago. So besides publicizing principles, there's a small network of people who I know I'm in a relationship with. So if somebody wants to make a constitutional challenge and they reach out to me, I can show them things that have already been put together about a constitutional challenge, either religious liberties or just due process or taking of property.
Yeah, and to be honest with you, any of you are sitting there saying, I want to try the constitutional challenge. For that one, you're going to really have to know what you're doing. It may seem intuitively correct that your rights are being violated in these divorce circumstances, because they are, but if the court doesn't recognize it, they don't. So these challenges are rough. That said, every time somebody issues one, we need to publicize it and support it, because there's, this establishes things called case law, and it requires, and even it often will force legislators to go in and make changes. The bottom line is that these are tools by which we can fight a corrupt establishment, because no matter what anybody told you, people will never stop getting married. It's normal human behavior. So, marriage strike all you want. Eventually society has to fix this. And this is a good way of starting to fix this.
And Max, I'm not so sure. I guess it depends on the person, because there's a guy in Pennsylvania that I've been corresponding with for many months, and he was married in a Christian affiliation, but he is making a challenge totally based on constitutional principles, not bringing in religious liberties. There's a self-studied researcher, Matthew Johnston. He's pretty active on Facebook. He's got a regular job. He's probably in his early 30s. He works for some government office. He's very, very bright, has done a ton of research. He got interested in this because as a younger man, maybe 10 years ago, his mom was abandoned by his dad, and his mom was a defendant in no-fault divorce. And he just, it just struck him, there's something unjust, there's something wrong. And he's dedicated himself to researching about this. So he's actually doing a lot of research and providing information to the Pennsylvania husband. That article is on Mary's Advocates too. If you look at the blog section, I've written 2 articles about this guy. Some people are capable of learning about rules, following things. They can present themselves professionally. They can write. If you're one of those kind of people, you might be able to learn the local rules and at least get the beginning started. And that's what's going on with this guy.
Yeah, I'm going to back myself off. Okay, I was trying to be realistic because I've talked to a lot of guys in these situations. Okay, I really, really, really have. And most of them don't have what you just said. Most guys don't. I don't. I mean, I know some things and I've accomplished some things, but basically I'm not that guy. Most guys are not that guy.
Right.
But I have known at least 2 individuals in my lifetime who are unbelievably, they've been gifted by God or genetics, if that's what you want to say. And they can just handle themselves in court, and they can understand the legal stuff, and they can actually do
Right.
it. That is one man in 100,000, but he's out there. And if you're that guy, oh yes, cheer you on completely. If you are that guy, huh?
Right. This guy, he runs an ambulance company and he's a paramedic. So he's got to deal with government regulations. He's got to deal with employees. He's got to deal with following rules and keeping records. And he knows how to keep his cool in an absolute emotional crisis. Whereas some of the guys I talk to, you know, their wife leaves the marital home. They get served with papers telling them to get kicked out of their home. They're told to show up in court 3 days later. They show up in court. They don't know what's going on. The wife's lawyer hands them a piece of paper saying, sign this, and we're filing for divorce. The man is emotionally devastated, and he doesn't know what to do. He's trusting his lawyer, and that's where they get you. They get you because you're a person with a heart who is being attacked. It's not fair.
Yeah. Yeah. And lawyers frequently, I would actually have to say the majority of divorce lawyers, in my experience, really aren't your friend. They want your money and that's what they want. And they know there's a whole system in the courts where basically both the plaintiff and the defense attorneys make out, get good money, and have a fairly easy divorce. Yeah. And then that's it. And your lawyer will lie to you just to make you to, you know, and you find out later that not everything your lawyer didn't do everything he could have done. Heck, lawyers can even get in trouble for doing things that are legal for lawyers to do. I'll just mention this too. If you are one of those like super smart Bruce Lee, I get the legal stuff, I really can do this, do it, because also what a little secret, if you can represent yourself what's called pro se and you are that smart, and by the way, odds if you're listening, you aren't. But if you are that guy, go for it, because it turns out that if you're pro se and you're in court, there are secrets to the court that like all lawyers know or are kind of bound to, or could like lose their career or get in trouble with a judge if they pull it, because there's a nice sweet system there. But somebody who's not even an attorney can hit every one of those buttons that a normal lawyer would be afraid to do or might jeopardize him. So, I mean, if you are one of those types of litigants, like I said, I've met 2 in my life who are brilliant and can represent themselves in court and beat lawyers. I've known 2 guys who beat lawyers routinely who are not lawyers. Those guys are heroes. So if you're that guy, go do it. Just look at the resources. Or if you know a guy who's that kind of smart, support him. Because literally some of the most dangerous men in the court are the ones who know as much or more than the lawyers and aren't lawyers, because they can do things lawyers can't or won't do. So, I mean, I know I'm just ranting, but this is a big deal because this affects all of us. Even I, as a 50-plus-year-old man, who am divorced, by the way, and remarried, and I have kids, but I'm a divorced dad. I do get along with my ex, luckily. But the bottom line is that this still affects us. The number of kids of divorce that I meet in their 30s now, it fundamentally, they get defensive, but you can see it in their personality, the instability, the insecurity, it's not good for anybody that we let this keep going on.
Hey, Max, will you Google Primal Loss book? Because there's a book written by an editor, Layla Miller, and she pulled together, it's called Primal Loss. She pulled together narratives submitted by adult children of divorce. And I don't publicize this often, but I got into this work because I was a defendant in a divorce in 2003. And I thought I was a pretty morally grounded person. And this struck me as something's unjust. Something's very unjust. And the damage that it does to kids,
it's lifelong.
They're told to be quiet. They're told you're resilient. A child naturally feels, I want to be loyal to my dad. I want to be loyal to my mom. Or if, let's say, the dad was, what do you call it, the narcissist rich guy or whatever that filed for divorce for no just cause, if that's your dad, a person doesn't want to realize, crap, my dad wrecked my upbringing. He stole from me. I mean, he stole from me what I naturally deserve, because everybody by nature is born to a mom and a dad. And the culture functions a lot better when kids are raised by their moms and dads. And yes, mom and dads fight. But when one is disheartened, we didn't used to have the government rewarding them for reneging on the marriage promises and forcing the kids to go back and forth. So I'm friends with this editor. And for people who did grow up in a divorced home, reading stories of people who finally are saying, this was my actual experience. Because we were told to shut up. We were told we don't matter. We were told we're resilient. We were told it's fine for us to go back and forth.
Yeah.
And
it's not. I was one of those kids in the 70s, and I was rare. And it was not normal for me to be the child of a divorced couple when I was a kid in the 70s. But now it's like every other guy I know, every other woman I know. And no, really, guys, it's really hurting all of us. And it needs to stop. It does need to stop, and we need to be pursuing legal strategies and social strategies. And by social strategies, I mean really, it means something. Christians, especially, you need to hear this. Start getting harder on your Christian brothers and sisters who are getting divorced, and tell them they're sinning, and tell them that they need to work on saving this for the sake of God, for the sake of society, for the sake of the kids, for the sake of everybody. At some point, we have to put this pressure on and stop applauding or stop shrugging. It's not okay. We've been going our hour. Our hour has just disappeared, Bay. But I want to. Is there anything else you wanted to get out before we finish up here?
One quick last unusual resource. Resources Defending Marriage Petition Bishop. It's a Catholic endeavor. When one spouse abandons the marriage and that person professes to be a good Catholic, the defendant can petition the diocese and ask the diocese to implement the Catholic Code of Canon Law and Separation of Spouses, which no one's heard of. But
it's there. Yeah,
this section. And I show people how to petition the bishop. When, like, you're saying Christians need to be more strong with each other, holding someone accountable to stop when they're trying to break up their marriage. This is a way to get the Catholic Church authority to try to hold someone accountable when they're breaking up their marriage and get them the right kind of mediation and help to reconcile. So that was the last one I wanted to plug as one of our very unique resources that nobody's publicizing.
I think this is actually a big deal because it also puts the feet to the bishop's fire, who have been, in sympathy to the bishops, they've been completely burdened with annulment requests over the last few decades. They just can't keep up with them. But putting and there's been a tendency to just give up and just whatever, what are we going to do? But this is a way of putting their feet to the fire. Hey,
a lot of Catholic clergy or diocesan personnel staff do not understand that divorce is forced on an innocent defendant. They think, divorce occurs when both parties want a divorce. That's mistaken. Yeah, on paper, that's what happens a lot of times because of the coercion of a defendant, because you're going to lose anyway. But if we bring this to their attention, I'm hoping we start to get a sea change. And can you imagine if half the dioceses in the United States were as upset about no-fault divorce as they're upset about some of the other social issues? That would be a good thing.
Oh, yeah. It's absolutely going, but speaking as a religious guy, it's going to be up to the laity to do this. The bishops aren't going to do anything. I don't want to say none of them will, but you know what I mean. It's going to be up to the laity to just start pushing for this and start demanding it. And this can cause change. It really can cause widespread social change. It can even cause social change outside of Catholicism. But my bottom line strategy is this: we need to all, as a society, religious or not, start getting harder on people who get divorced. Start getting a negative attitude about it. Oh, really? You're getting divorced? What? Well, what? That's not what's up. Why aren't you trying to save your marriage? Why aren't you, if there's a problem, why aren't you separating until you can work it out? Whatever it is, that really needs to start becoming an attitude socially, religiously, culturally. because as others have said, politics is downstream of culture. If enough people in the culture are pushing back against divorce culture, especially no-fault divorce culture, and are pushing back against broken families and saying, this is good for nobody, this isn't good for your kids, this isn't good for you, this isn't good for everybody, anybody, we can see a change, and I think that we will. So anyway, thanks so much for joining us, Bay. I really appreciate it. I want everybody to make sure to go to marysadvocates.org. And if you support their work, the work that Bay is doing, please do, and of course, also help her out financially. So we're going to go ahead and wrap up the show. I want to thank Bay for coming on. Did you have a final thought you wanted to get out?
Nope, all is good.
All right. Well, God bless you for this work, and keep on doing on, because it is desperately needed. In the meantime, we'll be here tomorrow night. I forget what we have on the schedule, but if you can, we're here every night. We're going to have John C. write in again in a few days. We are on every single night here, so please support us on redpillreligion.com. Hit our Patreon, our funding vehicles, Patreon, Subscribestar, PayPal, Bitcoin, all that good stuff. We are here every night. So give us a like, give us a subscribe, tell your friends or enemies, and God bless everybody.
Thanks, Max.